Well, after sitting down with Chris Minns, it is clear that this is a man who believes he will be the next Premier. He is calm, he's considered, he is confident, and on face value, he looks ready to take on the state's top job. Crucially, he seems across the detail, even if there are some holes, despite sharing many personal similarities with Dominic Perrottet in age, family. They do have radically different policy platforms. Nowhere is that clearer than on energy and, more broadly, the raging debate over the merits of privatisation v public ownership of assets. Today, we have seen perhaps the biggest distinction drawn on this issue. With all the focus on cost of living right now, Chris Minns has taken the enormous risk in admitting that his plan will take at least 6 years to bring down power prices. The government is offering immediate relief through a $250 voucher, albeit for 1 year. Voters will get to choose between the sugar hit now or trusting Labor to deliver into elections time. So how much will your policy bring down power prices by and when?
I think it's reasonable for me to say we're going to make long-term structural reform that we believe will impact the reliable supply of energy in New South Wales.
Ballpark? Like, is it going to be more than $250 over 3 years?
Well, I'm going to be honest with the people of New South Wales and say that the benefits of this policy will be felt 6 and 7 years down the line, and it's not possible for me to explain.
7 years, they're going to have to wait.
They're going to look at it and say, Labor's got an honest policy when it comes to energy. They're looking down the runway to make sure that we don't have these problems over and over again. But I like their policy in relation to tolls. A $60 cap to make sure that I don't pay exorbitant tolls to private toll road companies that shouldn't have been privatised in the first place.
Do you really think it's reasonable to say your toll relief plan makes up for the cost of living when it comes to energy when that affects 2% of people? But
that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that voters will make a decision.
Direct comparison there.
Voters will make a decision about who's got the best plan for cost of living and the future of the state.
He's right, they will, and that is up front. That is a big distinction there. So watch this space. This will be a major electoral battleground, and you heard it here first. Another thing to take note of, Chris Minns is selling off public land to build more houses. Only 30% of that is social housing. That is asset recycling, a form of privatisation, even if not strictly speaking. It is hard to see how he'll be able to stick to this promise of no privatisation over the long term. This is a roll gold guarantee there will be no privatisation under your leadership.
Privatisation of assets owned by the people of New South Wales, the monopoly that you, for example, water and electricity, we're not going to sell them off, no.
Okay, but privatisation as a whole?
Yeah, privatisation.
You're ruling it out?
Right. Correct.
Okay, so how are you going to implement your housing policy?
Well, I mean, there's several elements to our housing policy. Part of it will be ensuring that the Greater Cities Commission can rebalance where people live in New South Wales.
But your housing policy does rely on selling off land to developers. It's privatisation, isn't it?
No, it doesn't. No, we'll certainly look at land owned by the people of New South Wales to make sure that there's opportunities for growth and housing in particular. But there's a role currently in New South Wales, it's at the moment run by Landcom, owned by the New South Wales government. That land is obviously used for housing in the state, partnering with the private sector to build that infrastructure. But by no definition does that meet the technical definition of privatisation. Okay. I don't believe that it is.
Privatising land and not projects. Is that a fair characterisation?
Absolutely not.
Maybe I was getting a bit technical there, but you can see how that might get difficult for him. One question I asked many months ago, and again today, is what infrastructure will you build for Western Sydney? He nominated the Parramatta Light Rail Stage 2, which is east of Parramatta. Perhaps a bit rich, given the opposition has repeatedly criticised the government for not building infrastructure, transport infrastructure in Western Sydney. It is one thing to criticise your opponents for not building public transport in Western Sydney, but at some point, he has to promise something new for himself. Otherwise, it's empty rhetoric. Then will come the challenge for paying for it, and we have seen no evidence of that yet, only vague promises of mature conversations around wages, productivity gains to pay for other things, and budget savings too. But with multi-billion-dollar wage promises coming and election promises made and pending, the numbers at this stage don't quite add up. There's still a couple of weeks to go, granted. Economic credibility is on the line here too, and much hangs on the release of policy costings just before polling day. This will be a crucial moment in the campaign. Now, this sit-down interview was just over half an hour and nothing was off limits. Even still, there are a few questions that remain unanswered. You'd expect that this far out from election day. I do think the measure of a man is how you deal with your opponent, though, and your critics. This is what he had to say about Dominic Perrottet. You and Dominic Perrottet are actually quite similar people. You're both relatively young fathers. No, let's call you young. You're both young fathers.
Thank you.
You're both guided by your Catholic faith. You're family men. How do you differ?
I mean, look, aside from the last half an hour of me explaining in chapter and verse how we do things differently, look, on a personal level, I think he's a lovely person, and I think I've got a friendship with him. And other than at the election on the 25th of March, I wish him all the best.
Has he been a good premier, do you think? I mean, the state's in pretty good shape. Why should he be kicked out?
I think it's time for a change. I genuinely do.
Is that it? Just because it's time for a change?
Well, I think the government's best days are behind them. I think genuinely their best people have left. And I don't think, for all of his exemplary personal qualities, that he can lead a united team that can fix the real challenges facing New South Wales.
So it's his team, not him.
I think that well, I mean, he's part of that team. He's led it for a long time. My other criticism of Dom, and I think that this is in contrast to me, is that he takes big swings that often fail, and it's often taxpayers that have to bail out the New South Wales government. So iCare was a decision that he made. He's wholly involved in the creation of the concept. It required a $4 billion bailout by New South Wales taxpayers. Transport, under his administration as Treasurer and Premier of the state, has had budget blowouts of between $16 to $17 billion. Laurie, you could bulldoze half the hospitals in Sydney and rebuild them just based on the blowouts in transport alone. Now, these aren't victimless crimes. Taxpayers have to pick up the bill. And I think that when it comes to basic administration as well as a vision for the state, Labor's in a better position.
What do you reckon your critics say about you?
I don't know. And, you know...
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to them. My job's...
Any self-reflection? Like, have you...
Of course, but my job in the middle of an election campaign is to tell voters what we would do differently.
Well, you know what your critics used to say?
What?
That you're not across the detail. Is that fair?
I don't think that's fair, no.
Yeah, okay. Do you think that's something that has evolved?
Laura, are you asking me how my critics criticism of me
we all have
evolved?
our quiet moments, right? And we reflect on the things we can improve on.
Sure.
Going to be the Premier of the state, you're on your way. What can you improve on?
Well, I mean, everyone can improve all the time. I think that I approach politics in a really empathetic way. I'm not, you know, dogmatic or about these issues, but after wide consultation, I make decisions. And I've got a disciplined and united team that is prepared to back me and implement them. And
someone that's across the detail?
I'd like to think so.
Okay. Should I ask you what the inflation rate is?
Sure.
So what is it?
It's between 7 and 8%. It's 7.6% at the moment.
Okay. And the cash rate at the moment?
3.35.
Well prepared. Would be Premier. Chris Minns, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Laura.
Two little tests there at the end. Couldn't quite help myself.